While the massive clean-up is well underway in Queensland, the full environmental impact of the floods is still being assessed. The enormous amount of water that flowed down the Brisbane River 2 weeks ago brought with it thousands of tonnes of silt, which is now settling in Moreton Bay. And that silt is laced with all the pollutants of agricultural and urban development. Scientists are now trying to determine how this will affect the Moreton Bay Marine Park and its vulnerable populations of dugongs and sea turtles. Peter McCutcheon reports.
The floodwaters may have receded, but Brisbane's Moreton Bay is still in shock. Environmental scientist Andrew Moss knows there's trouble lurking beneath the surface. He's not sure exactly how much trouble, but he's trying to find out.
The temperature is 26.6.
Conductivity?
Conductivity is 43.0. Well, the data's obviously suggested there's a lot of dirt out in the bay. We're starting to see little starts of algal growth in the bay.
That algal bloom is expected to peak in coming weeks, turning the water here a distinctive green. But that's only part of the problem, with a potentially toxic cocktail of silt and pollutants flowing into the Moreton Bay Marine Park.
Yeah, it's definitely going to have an impact on the park, and it's been 37 years since the last major flood, so it's a very rare event.
Early last week, the plume of silt coming out of the Brisbane River was clearly visible.
So obviously there's been a huge mass of fresh water and silt and various contaminants come into the bay, so we'll be looking at the effects of those over the next few weeks because they don't all happen straight away.
The silt has mostly travelled to the northern and western part of the bay, but some of this has shifted south and east to the bay's more environmentally sensitive areas. Where the silt eventually ends up depends on tidal movements and the wind direction over the next few weeks.
That sediment that's now in Moreton Bay is laced with the toxicants and the fertilizer that should be on the crops, growing the crops in the lockyer. And now it's a pollutant because it's a problem.
Professor Bill Dennison is a former Brisbane resident and international expert on seagrasses who has written several books on Moreton Bay. He says the plume of silt poses a threat to seagrasses that are the main source of food for the bay's turtles and dugongs.
Moreton Bay is really globally unique. It's the only place on the planet where you can be in a healthy dugong turtle population and see a major city skyline.
Park rangers are looking under the surface of the bay with the help of underwater cameras to document exactly how the silt is affecting sensitive seagrasses. This is where the topsoil from the devastated Lockyer Valley is ending up, a murky cloud slowly making its way to the bottom of the bay.
Gradually it will settle, and therein lies a problem. Firstly, it impedes light, so light won't reach the bottom parts of the bay, and those things that require light, like seagrass, will be badly affected.
Some of our threatened species that are so used to living here in Moreton Bay with a lush seagrass pasture may not find it's like that for the next few months.
Researchers also want to determine how many heavy metals, pesticides and contaminants from sewage overflow have made their way out to sea. The chair of a scientific panel advising the Queensland Government on waterways says this information is vital.
That, in fact, is the most immediate problem because that will impact our ability to eat seafood from the bay. It will impact on livelihoods, and it will impact on the recreational value of the bay going forward. So there are surveys being done at the moment to determine how significant that is.
In the longer term, the flood and its effect on Moreton Bay raises questions about future development along key waterways.
I think of it kind of like a bit of a heart attack. You know, here we have this great artery running through this vibrant city, this fantastic Brisbane River that has been embraced by the city. And all of a sudden we have this major event. So we have to listen to what that tells us. We need to think of the river not as a pipe, but as a living being. And just as the blood coursing through our body, we need to look after it.
Moreton Bay has been hit by big floods many times before, but this is the first time it's experienced a massive inflow in the 21st century, with all the accompanying pollutants of modern life.
There is a human dimension to this in that a lot of the contaminants coming down the river are sourced from sewage treatment plants, from sediment, from agricultural areas. They contain chemicals that you wouldn't normally find in the bay.
Scientists are cautiously optimistic the bay is resilient enough to cope with this shock. But the disaster of 2 weeks ago is still being played out.
And we're not out of the woods yet. We still are in the middle of cyclone season. We still have cyclones forming out there in the Pacific Ocean. So we've got a very watchful brief, and particularly in the next 2 weeks, that's the most vulnerable period.
Peter McCutcheon reporting there.